Hello, you're watching DD News and I'm Preeti presenting late edition this evening. The Goa Declaration signed after conclusion of the 8th BRICS Summit pledged opposition to terrorism. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, and I quote him, "We also agreed that those who nurture, shelter, support and sponsor such forces of violence and terror are as much a threat to us as the terrorists themselves." Prime Minister Modi called Pakistan the mothership of terror. Barely a day after the BRICS summit concluded, with India using the opportunity to raise the menace of cross-border terrorism from across the border, China stoutly defended Pakistan, making it clear that it was opposed to a specific country or religion being linked with terrorism. China has raised eyebrows when it defended its all-weather ally Pakistan by saying that Pakistan too has made sacrifices at the hands of terrorism and called the other nations to acknowledge it. Today in late edition, we will discuss how significant is the statement by China in context of India's fight against terror. We have with us in our studio Mr. Vivek Katju. He is former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. We're also joined in by Mr. Sushant Sareen. He's a strategic expert, and Mr. Vijay, Kranti, senior journalist. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us this evening on Late Edition. Mr. Katju, I will first ask you the significance and the context of the Chinese statement by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, wherein it says that Pakistan has also suffered at the hands of terrorism and that China refuses to link terrorism to a particular country or a religion. How far is it an indication of China's position and China's stand on India's anti-Pak agenda and way forward from here on?
Look, I think the Chinese statement is not at all surprising, but we need to analyze it. No country links, and certainly India has never linked terrorism with any particular religion. So there can be no objection to that part of the statement. But countries such as Pakistan, and specifically Pakistan, has, as the Prime Minister rightly said, been the mothership with regard to terrorism. It has radiated terrorism all across the globe. But given the evolving nature of the Pakistan-China relationship, the Chinese defense of Pakistan is not at all surprising. There is one other fact which we need to take into account. China is saying that Pakistan too has suffered from terrorism and the world must acknowledge its defense of terrorism and the sacrifices it has made. Now the fact is that Pakistan is a victim of the terrorism that it has itself nurtured. These are terrorists that have turned against the Pakistan state, just as the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and Pakistan has no alternative but to combat it. What China has overlooked are terrorist groups like the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed that are targeting the region, targeting Afghanistan, targeting India, and this China is doing because of the nexus it has with Pakistan, and unfortunately that nexus is against India. It has always been so.
All right, Mr. Kranti, I would want you to take this thought forward from here on. After the Uri attack, after the surgical strikes, we've seen different nations, different world leaders condemn terrorism. At the same time, they did support India's action against terrorism. Why is it that Pakistan is of importance to China? On one hand, we have the entire world, and China is the only nation at present openly supporting Pakistan, and so much so that to this extent it has gone on saying that Pakistan itself has suffered at the hands of terrorism. Made sacrifices.
You know, we should understand China's mindset, China's future goals, China's style of working. China has its own design about Asia. China wants to dominate not all the entire world, but it has to start with Asia. So it cannot dominate Asia without dominating India. It tried already through small countries like Nepal and a little bit, some tried with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. But Pakistan has been its all-weather friend, as they always say. So without Pakistan, there are so many reasons why Pakistan is important to it. Number one, Pakistan is the only country which is ready to work as a proxy against India. To keep India down, so that China looks bigger or China succeeds, that is necessary. And then China wants to reach Arabian Sea and through Arabian Sea to other parts of the world, for example, Indian Ocean. And Pakistan is the only country which has offered it, what you call this CPEC. Actually, CPEC is not only a pacemaker for the China's overall designs on this region and international ones, it is a kind of detonator in the belly of India, because this CPEC, the entire corridor passes through that area which actually belongs to India but is occupied by Pakistan. So China in that way, if once it has control on that area, and it has already now, it has encircled India from that side. And then one more thing, why Pakistan is important to China is Pakistan is a nursery of terrorism. All these Jaish-e-Mohammed and other groups, they are the people, they are the groups who have been training the Xinjiang terrorists, or what China called terrorists, the freedom fighters of East Turkestan, which is occupied by China, and they have renamed it as Xinjiang. So these Uyghur freedom fighters have been getting their training, the violent section of them.
Yes.
So Pakistan becomes very important for China for so many ways, for so many reasons. So it's very natural. We should understand that Pakistan is indispensable for China, and unfortunately for China and for Pakistan, India has stood up to that challenge, and now both Pakistan and China are feeling uncomfortable, and that's why you see how China, before President Xi Jinping came to India, and after it was over, on both occasions they spoke through a double tongue against India.
Yes, Mr. Sareen, when the Chinese president was heading towards India before the BRICS summit, there was a statement coming in from China which said that there is no need to politicize terrorism at all. This was one aspect. At the same time, we've seen after the BRICS summit, they say there has been a statement from the Chinese side which says that they condemn terrorism in all forms. This is on one hand, and at the same time, China has in fact again used its veto against the sanctions against Masood Azhar at UNSC. Do all this go together?
Actually, they do. See, what we are trying to do is we are trying to look at things in black and white. But I don't think the world of diplomacy, and probably Mr. Katju can say this better than me, diplomacy operates in the shades of grey, and when countries see their national interest linked to another country, although that is not for all times to come, that is always a kind of a temporary phenomena or a short term or a medium term phenomena. So they take those positions. For example, the kind of positions which the Chinese are taking today, I remember in the 80s when we had Pakistan sponsored terrorism in Punjab. That was precisely the kind of position which the Americans were taking, almost something similar to that. The Americans could not or would not countenance or would not even agree that what was happening in Punjab was terrorism, cross-border terrorism. Even in the early 90s, the Americans, although they did try and at one point of time portray Pakistan to be a terrorist state or threaten to label it as a terrorist state, but they didn't go the whole hog. Even today, because they have certain interests linked in Afghanistan, the Americans go up to a point but not beyond a point. I think the Chinese are doing something similar. They have, as Mr. Katju very rightly listed out, they have very vital interests in Pakistan. The Pakistanis kowtow to every Chinese demand. Let us keep in mind that both the Lal Masjid operation in 2007 and the so-called Operation Zarb-e-Azb or Zarb-e-Bakwas, as many of people call it, was actually directed against people who had targeted the Chinese interests. If you look at Zarb-e-Azb and the Pakistani army statements which came out after Zarb-e-Azb started, for the first at least couple of weeks, every statement would mention that the Pakistanis were targeting the Uyghur terrorists who were there in that area. So obviously the Pakistanis give to the Chinese, as at one point of time they used to give to the Americans what they wanted. So Pakistan is an ideal proxy state, it's an ideal client state as long as that relationship lasts. But there will come a time, if the Pakistanis were not loyal to the Americans, I don't see how they are going to always be loyal to the Chinese, and I think the Chinese will get their just desserts, just like the Americans have got it, over the years. So I for one would not be surprised if this double speak and double standards of the Chinese, which are very apparent both in the case of naming and shaming Pakistan, in the case of Masood Azhar. How can it be that the Chinese agree to the labeling of Jaish-e-Mohammed as a terrorist organization, but the head of that organization is not a terrorist, and that you need a whole lot of consultations? Do the Chinese seek consultations when they threaten small countries which invite the Dalai Lama? They don't. Do the Chinese go after all this consensus building where their interests are involved? They don't. So obviously these are the double standards of diplomacy. These are the double standards which come when you are a rising power, but these are double standards which ultimately come and bite you back. And if the Chinese, after being a 5,000-year-old civilization, cannot understand how this thing operates, then God help them.
But then you're talking of these different shades of grey where diplomacy works. Mr. Sareen, I would want you to elaborate more on the relevance of BRICS then. We've seen that BRICS comprises of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Taking up the issue of terrorism, taking up the issue of Pakistan on a forum where Pakistan itself is not a member, did that really serve the purpose? You're talking of the different shades of diplomacy here. I would want your reactions on this as well.
See, number one, I think our mistake is to reduce BRICS to only to the issue of terrorism. I think BRICS is a lot more than just terrorism. But for us and for other countries, at least for China and Russia up to a point, terrorism is an important issue. So if we flag that issue, I don't think there's any problem in doing that, because it is a burning issue. And the Indian position has been that when we talk about economy, when we talk about development, when we talk about investments, when we talk about connectivity and trade flows, terrorism is a big problem, so it needs to be addressed. And if that terrorism is emanating out of a state which uses it as part of its foreign policy, then it's even a bigger problem. Now that was our position. We've pushed the envelope. I don't think anybody, at least in the government, had any starry-eyed notions that one meeting the Chinese come out here, in the climate of Goa, the beaches and everything, and the Chinese will get swayed by it and they will agree to everything we say. That's not the way this thing happens. But I think what we are doing is we are flagging the issue, we are registering our concerns, we are pushing the envelope at every meeting. But let us keep in mind that that is a small issue of the larger conception of the BRICS forum. And there are other issues which acquire equal importance, if not more importance, from a very, very long-term kind of a perspective, from a point of view of development, from the point of view of connectivity, from the point of view of attracting investment flows. So I don't think it was either this or that. Okay. So we did push the envelope. We did not get everything we wanted, but I don't think we are any worse off for that.
All right, we'll continue that thought forward, but at present we're heading for a short commercial break. In late edition, stay with us. We're discussing China's statement wherein it has stoutly defended Pakistan.
बैंक खाते का नियमित इस्तेमाल अब बनाए जिंदगी खुशहाल। घर पर पैसे रखने की आदत को करो चेंज। बैंक में आपके पैसे रहेंगे सुरक्षित और जमा राशि पर आपको मिलेगा आकर्षक ब्याज भी। अपना मोबाइल नंबर पंजीकरण करना ना भूलें। खाते में आधार नंबर दर्ज करवाकर सरकारी सब्सिडी का लाभ सीधा अपने खाते में पाएं। रुपए डेबिट कार्ड का इस्तेमाल एटीएम, पीओएस और ई-कॉमर्स हेतु करें। हर 90 दिनों में कम से कम एक बार अपना रुपए डेबिट कार्ड या आधार कार्ड द्वारा बैंक संचालन करने पर आपको मिलेगा 1 लाख तक का दुर्घटना बीमा बिल्कुल मुफ्त। बैंक खाते का कीजिए नियमित संचालन, इससे आपके जीवन में आएगी नई रौनक।
घर घर में एक बैंक खाता, अपना अपना भाग्य बिठाता।
बचपन से ही मुझे पता था I was a born leader, और इस बात का एहसास दिलाया मेरी पहली जॉब ने। वो सब सिखाया जो कोई और नौकरी नहीं सिखा सकती। मैन मैनेजमेंट, टाइम मैनेजमेंट, क्राइसिस मैनेजमेंट, सब कुछ। पहले ही दिन से मैं टीम को लीड कर रहा था और जितने साल मैंने बिताए उससे कई ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस मिला मुझे। और सबसे अच्छी बात, माय फर्स्ट जॉब मेड माय सेकंड करियर पॉसिबल।
हम है भारत के सबसे एक्साइटिंग वर्कप्लेस और हम दे रहे हैं आपको एक ऑफर। भारतीय सेना, आम नहीं ये जिंदगी।
फिर तो मैंने उसकी धुलाई की ना, सारी इकड़ी निकाल दी। मैंने अपना उस्तरा निकाला, कर दिया, कहला भाई 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 प्लीज मेरी रैगिंग मत करो, मेरी रैगिंग मत करो। राहुल क्या राहुल सुसाइड कर लिया और उसने है?
रैगिंग आपकी जिंदगी के वो हसीन पल छीन सकता है जो आपने और आपके पेरेंट्स ने आपके लिए सोचा है। आपकी जिंदगी और करियर आपके हाथ में है। स्टॉप रैगिंग।
आप लोग बाजार आते हैं, सामान खरीदते हैं, पैसे देते हैं और चले जाते हैं, यही ना? हाँ। तो बिल कौन लेगा?
बिल का क्या करना है?
और बिना बिल के सामान सस्ता भी तो मिल जाता है।
क्या आपको मालूम है कि बिना बिल के सामान आपको सस्ता क्यों मिल जाता है? ऐसा करके आप नकली और तस्करी के सामानों को बढ़ावा देते हैं और इस खतरनाक कारोबार से हमारे देश को हर साल लगभग 73,000 करोड़ का नुकसान होता है। तो अब से आप क्या करेंगे?
छोटा कोई काम नहीं जो लगन से करे वो पूरा, बड़े बड़े सपने हो पूरे कोई न रहे अधूरा, खुद को कम ना समझना यारों, कम नहीं तेरी कोशिश, जो भी कर जी जान से कर, खुशियां की होगी बारिश।
जीवन के सफर में जी जान लगा देने वालों का फोन जीवी।
अब ना होगा केवाईसी का झंझट और ना मार्जिन पेमेंट का। सर आपका चाय। और भाभी जी कैसी हैं? वहाँ मायके में है, ठीक ही रहती है वो। और टैक्स भी नहीं देना पड़ेगा और ना हमारा नाम कहीं पे आएगा। इसे कहते हैं डब्बा ट्रेडिंग। इसी को कहते हैं
डब्बा गुल, क्योंकि ताली कभी एक हाथ से नहीं बजती, इसलिए डब्बा ट्रेडिंग करना या करवाना दोनों ही कानूनन अपराध हैं। सिर्फ सेबी रेकग्नाइज्ड स्टॉक एक्सचेंज पे ही ट्रेडिंग कीजिए। सेबी, हर इन्वेस्टर की ताकत।
बच्चों जवाब ठीक से देना और सफाई के 10 नंबर होंगे। चौंकिए मत, डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया से बचने के लिए ये जरूरी है। आसपास पानी जमा ना होने दें। ड्रम, कूलर, गमले को हर सप्ताह साफ करें। प्लास्टिक के कप व नारियल की खोल जैसी चीजों को इधर उधर न फेंकें, क्योंकि डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया का मच्छर साफ पानी में पनपता है। मच्छरों के काटने से बचें। बुखार में पैरासिटामोल लें, एस्पिरिन हरगिज न लें।
इस बार तो बच्चों ने हमें ही पास कर दिया।
और सफाई के नंबर 100 में से 100।
हाँ।
Welcome back after the break. You're watching Late Edition this evening. Today on Late Edition, we're talking of China double speaking on terrorism and stoutly defending Pakistan. We're joined in by 3 guests in our studio. Mr. Katju, when we headed for the break, Mr. Sareen had talked of how there are different shades of diplomacy and it's not just black and white. I would want you to elaborate more on us. We've seen time and again the Indian leadership has expressed and raised concerns about the CPEC. I would want you to explain to us, the Prime Minister during the G20 summit in China had talked of how the route passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. How big is it a threat towards Indian interests?
Before that, let me just say one thing. I think in the specific context after Uri, the Prime Minister has done it perfectly right when he has raised the issue of cross-border terrorism from Pakistan in a strong way, because he is putting the world on notice that India's policy is changing, that we will no longer passively accept Pakistan's cross-border terrorism. Now, as far as CPEC is concerned, of course it affects our interests because it passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. But having said that, let us be no doubt that China, to my mind, is determined to go ahead with this project, both for strategic as well as for economic reasons. And the Pakistanis are viewing it as a game changer as far as the economy is concerned. In respect of the nexus between Pakistan and China, this is a game changer, because as till now the Pakistan-China relationship was based on a shared negativity towards India. Now there is a positive pillar being added by way of connectivity. So therefore, this is a problem for us, and we will have to find ways of dealing with it. I think the Chinese and the Pakistanis both are apprehensive that India has ways to intervene in this process that is taking place. We don't have a tradition of such intervention, but the Chinese and the Pakistanis must realize, the Chinese in particular, that if Indian interests are harmed by way of access, then India at some stage or the other may start thinking of protecting its interests.
All right, Mr. Vijay Kranti, elaborate for us more on the clout which China has been focusing on in the region, in the sense that from here on the Chinese president headed on to Bangladesh, and the visit came after as many as 30 years. There is also talk of starting a new strategic relationship between the two countries. It was Nepal earlier, then Sri Lanka, and also we've seen Bangladesh and Pakistan for that matter. When Prime Minister Modi had pledged $2 billion as the line of credit to build 2 power plants in Bangladesh, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has pledged $34 billion for infrastructure projects in Bangladesh. Elaborate for more on how can India deal with this big money diplomacy which is being done by China?
You know, there are two parts of my answer. One is that India doesn't have to match China as far as money is concerned, because this is a front on which winning is not very easy. We have seen China practically buying foreign policy of so many countries. We have the example, for example, of the Ivory Coast. You know, it practically bought over Ivory Coast's policy on Taiwan. In one night, this was the country which had relations with Taiwan, and they gave up. China practically bought the foreign policy of Spain. They forced them in one night, simply, really in one night, they forced the parliament of Spain to sit in a special session and change their constitution, because otherwise their leaders would have been have got arrested, or because of their crimes in Tibet. In South Africa, again, the way they behaved, they didn't allow Dalai Lama even to get his visa. So when it comes to money, I don't think India should compete with China in its foreign policy. India has many other good things, a lot of strong points to win over its own neighbors. India has to focus more on Sri Lanka, on Bangladesh, on Nepal. India is already dealing well with Bhutan. So if China is going and spending more money in Bangladesh, I would say that it only shows somewhere that China is jittery on increasing clout of India. And as I can see that the new government, especially under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, things are changing, and diplomacy is taking those such directions which I think are very desirable and admirable.
All right, things are changing. As concluding remarks, Mr. Katju, let's talk of the way forward from here on. There is talk of a complete boycott of the Chinese products in India. Is it really possible? We've talked of the foreign policies. Every nation has a different foreign policy. There are friends, there are foes. But then eventually, can we actually boycott a nation? And given the fact that China is the largest trading partner of India, I'll give you the statistics. Imports from China were around $63 billion and exports were $10 billion. So China has been giving us products, talking of cost competitiveness. But then eventually, what is the way forward from here on?
Look, on China, I'll come, but one sentence on Bangladesh. I do not see the Bangladesh leadership ever being bought up on its foreign policy and its strategic interests by any country, leave alone China. Second, the Chinese relationship is a difficult relationship for us, but we've got to manage it. There are areas where we need to cooperate, but there are areas of intense competition too. And at the end of the day, it is our own inherent strengths that have to come into play. I'm saying this is no cliche, because ultimately foreign and strategic policies depend on one's own internal strengths. And I do believe that there are considerable strengths in India which will enable us to safeguard and protect our interests vis-a-vis the Chinese.
All right, Mr. Sareen, would you agree to that?
Well, partly yes, but you know, I have a bit of a counterintuitive kind of a take on this entire thing. Number one, I don't think we should ignore the importance of money in diplomacy. It is the thing which makes the mayor go. So the Americans did it, now the Chinese are doing it. So let's not underestimate the influence of money. Of course, as far as India is concerned, while we may not be able to match the Chinese in terms of, you know, the kind of grand announcements they make, but what is it about India that when we enter into projects with some of our neighboring countries, we don't deliver it on that? I think we need to look within ourselves. We promise a lot of things to our neighbors and we don't deliver. And I think that is one of the biggest problems in our diplomacy. As far as the Chinese are concerned, we've seen the Sri Lankan example. The investments which they've made out there are white elephants and they're a millstone around Sri Lanka's neck. And I would suggest that rather than the CPEC being the game changer as it's being made out to be, my counterintuitive take on that would be, yes, it will be a game changer, but CPEC might ultimately turn out to be, and there's a 50-50 chance of that, actually becoming the deal breaker between China and Pakistan. And the reason for that is the kind of terms and conditions on which the Chinese are investing money out there. I don't see how the Pakistanis are going to be able to afford it. So either the Pakistanis become, let's say, a colony of the Chinese, which I don't think they would be so resentful of doing, or if the Pakistanis have any self-respect and they resist it, then the Chinese are going to get the same treatment that the Americans got before them. So I'm not entirely so pessimistic about the CPEC from India's security point of view. Of course, there are problems that if the Chinese set up a naval base in Gwadar, then we do have a problem on our hands. We do have a problem if investments are coming in POK. That is a problem. And of course, to the extent that the Pakistanis become a cat's paw in the hands of the Chinese, it is a problem. But on the flip side, there are other stuff which is happening in the region which may or may not actually it might actually lead to some kind of a deal breaker between the Chinese and Pakistanis. But that will happen maybe in 5 to 10 years from now, not immediately. Right now, the money is coming in, the Pakistanis love other people's money, so they're enjoying on it. But when the time comes to pay back, I think that is the time when we'll have to see how things work out.
They also love not to pay back.
Yes.
No, but
will the Chinese
quite likely for strategic reasons?
One thing very quickly, if you permit me to add.
Yes, Mr. Kranti.
India has to make Pakistan pay for all the crimes. Pakistan has so many things, so many big attractions as far as China is concerned. But India should make it sure that Pakistan is made to pay for it. For example, this CPEC. The problems it is creating in Gilgit and Baltistan, which actually belongs to India, is more serious than we can imagine here. Pakistan is facing horrible resistance there from locals. Now Balochistan again is rising up. So this CPEC is actually the entire corridor is Gilgit, Baltistan and Balochistan. If India plays its cards on both properly, I tell you, Pakistan will have to rethink about China.
All right, so on that note, we'll end this discussion here. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us on Late Edition this evening. So we had guests in our studio discussing about China's support towards Pakistan when we talk of it saying that Pakistan also suffered at the hands of terrorists. So there is silver lining in every dark cloud, and the positives have to be strengthened. China is an important partner for India. We have to work towards the positives, but not at the cost of Indian interests in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. On that note, we'll end this edition. Thanks for watching Late Edition. Bye-bye.